we're gonna start this vlog on day 3 because if you remember in the last vlog, which you can watch on the card showing up on your screen right now, we went through days 1 through 2 of this safari. In this vlog, we're going through 3 through 5 because there was a lot to unpack in these 3 days. And number 1, we started the morning off going out and photographing some just amazing rhino encounters on the very first moment we got out. There was golden light everywhere, and I was able to capture some amazing footage of these rhinos that were like right up next to the vehicle. Our guide, Yusuf, even like had to back up a little bit to kind of get away from the rhinos some because they were getting a little bit edgy, that we were getting too close. So he was being cautious while we were all snapping photos in these close encounters. And I know I always say with wildlife photography, like avoid the butt shot. Avoid the shot of the wildlife going away from you or their rear end facing the camera. Always connect with the eyes. But I was able to shoot this photograph of 3 rhinos as they walked away from me and kind of walked into the light. And it's just this really soft pastel shot that I really liked and really loved. And even though I always say that, there is room for that and room to break the rules sometimes in photography. And this was the same morning where I actually captured my favorite photograph of rhinos, and is 3 rhinos that were laying down in the grass just at the base of some low trees and some bushes. So it was really cool to capture this photograph just because they're lined up just so perfectly. One's facing left, one right, and one perfectly centered in there. And just having 3s in your photograph for some reason just lines up perfectly and always makes the image just a little bit more interesting. I absolutely love this shot, and connecting with such a big animal in such a peaceful moment was just really special on this particular morning. Day 3 in the afternoon was really special because we got to photograph 2 animals that I really wanted to see the entire time we were out there. And the first one we came across were some giraffes that were grazing on the acacia trees that were down in a valley and kind of on this plain, and it was really cool to see them. And one of the things that I love about photographing something like a giraffe or even a zebra is working with the patterns on their skin and on their fur, because it's just really unique. It's a unique pattern. There are different patterns that make up different species of giraffes. We were photographing the Rothschild giraffes, but it was just really interesting to get so close to such a big animal and photographing it. And one of my favorite photos was a black and white shot that I got of just the neck and the head coming up and just having this peaceful demeanor about him, and photographing a lot of contrast in the patterns that make up his fur. And then also I shot one in color just to have that one in the can too, and bring out a lot of contrast and clarity in those patterns and in the individual hairs that were on his nose and his mouth and going back onto the head as well. Now, just after the giraffes, our guide absolutely floored it, and we got over to a location of one of the animals that I wanted to photograph, and that was a male lion. And what was special about this is that he had just made a kill of a big buffalo, and he had dragged it up under a bush and he was guarding it. So he was really docile because he was tired and he was resting and just kind of laying down in the grass. And we were able to capture some amazing footage and photos of him as he kind of just paced in front of the buffalo in some amazing golden light, and having those like classic African grasses around him that you could blur and throw out of focus in the background and in the foreground too was just really cool. You know, what's interesting about moments like this though is that you see what I frame up and what I photograph. But oftentimes, whether that is landscape or wildlife photography, you go out and photograph something and you see this, a very peaceful scene where, you know, I'm probably the only safari vehicle there, where in reality, I see this, and kind of mass chaos happening all around me. And it was interesting to watch the lion as he moved his head and turned from one side to one side. You could hear all the shutters of the cameras that were going on from left to right just as he turned his head. While this chaos was going on, everyone was quiet. It was just a really special, peaceful moment and an amazing afternoon. I mean, giraffes and lions in one afternoon. Really, what more could you ask for? On day 4, we actually started the morning again really early, going out for some nice golden light photography. And the goal was to get out and find this lion that we had found last night. Our guide was telling us, he's going to guard that kill for as long as he can. So maybe, just maybe, we can see him again when we go out there. And we got out there, we looked, and we couldn't really find anything. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because it allowed me to photograph some of the landscapes that were going on. All around us we had this amazing fog that was dispersing, heavier in some areas, and the wind was kind of blowing the caps off the top of the fog and just kind of turning it over almost into like wave-like structures. So it was fun to photograph the fog that was dispersing behind the acacia trees on this plain up where we were photographing in the grasses, and having a lot of dynamic range to work with the bright equator sun, but at the same time, just a landscape unlike anything that I've ever photographed before. Now, we continued looking for the lion, but we came across these hyenas that were out in the field, probably about 200 yards away. And what we noticed, what was different about these hyenas, was that one of them was actually dragging the head of the buffalo of which we were looking for. So we immediately knew that the hyenas had gotten to the kill of the lion and had kind of dragged it in all different directions. This guy was pretty happy to get his teeth on the kill and have a nice breakfast. But it was just interesting to see, you play with what you have available to you. You play with, not wishing that you saw the lion that morning, but taking it in of this, a different moment of some hyenas that had gotten to the kill, and also the landscapes that were all around us. Now, right before we thought all was lost with seeing something really special, because we had already seen hyenas and it was cool to see them again, but we wanted to see something new. That shows how spoiled we were on this trip of encounters. Yusuf again floored the vehicle. I mean, we were going like 60 kilometers per hour down these dirt roads, just flying to get to whatever he had heard about. And when we got there, it was a cheetah and 4 cubs. And the cheetah was kind of standing guard in the plains. She was pretty far off, so it was difficult to frame something up really close up. But seeing that as a limitation allowed me to think a little bit differently about wildlife photography and frame it up in this window between some acacia trees, and also frame up the cubs as they span across the entire frame, going from left to right. You have all 4 kind of peeking out from behind this shrub that they were hiding under. And it was just fun photographing this cheetah as she walked back and forth, pacing and looking for food, but also staying away from predators, and then also playing with her 4 cubs. It was just, this morning in particular was one of my favorites, just because had time for landscapes, had time for the hyena photos, and then had this great adventure going out and photographing the cheetah and her cubs as well. The afternoon of day 4 didn't give me the photos that I thought I would get. We started going out looking for the cheetah because there had been some reports that she was in the same area. And we kind of tailed some of the other safari vehicles, thinking that they had heard something or seen something that we hadn't. So we were looking for the cheetah for a long time trying to find it, and we just came up empty-handed. And I liked the looking part of the wildlife safari and getting out and trying to find these animals, but this also gave me an opportunity to photograph some of the zebras that were grazing around us. And one of my favorite things about photographing zebras, and this photograph in particular, probably my favorite of the trip of zebras, was playing with the stripes and patterns that were going on around them. What I love to do, and what I found most interesting, was pairing and stacking these zebras against each other and have contrasting lines that were going on around them. And also playing with the golden light that was happening around us too really made for some dynamic highlights and shadows going on with these zebras. And even though we didn't find the cheetah again, kind of turning and pivoting and photographing stuff that's behind us as well helped us get some really great photos on this afternoon. I found it pretty difficult to vlog on this trip just because so many people have questions about like cameras and stuff, and then when we are in the field, it's more along the lines of, you know, getting the shot and getting the photo first, because it's not every day that you get to come to Kenya and have this experience. So every time we do get out in the field, it's just something that I want to get in camera, especially when you are in front of like a big lion or a cheetah with cubs, and having these experiences, and elephants as well. So it's been really cool to see. It's been a totally different experience too, but the vlogging has been difficult, so I've been trying to take time here and there just when I can. But you know, tonight we kind of struck out a little bit because we went out searching for the cheetah that we saw this morning and photographed, but for the most part everyone was kind of looking in the same area, but it seemed like she and her cubs had gone a different direction or were hiding, and we couldn't exactly find them, which that's just how it goes sometimes. You know, you go out looking, you go out trying to find things, but it's elusive. It's just like landscape photography. You go out wanting that sunset pic, but so often you miss it, or so often clouds roll in and sock you in a little bit and you don't get that dynamic light. So it's been really interesting in that aspect of just kind of adapting to what's in front of you and trying to find the right shot. But tonight's game drive is going to be at night. Everyone's pretty excited about it, and I know I am too. It's going to be pretty cool and difficult at the same time to photograph everything, especially big game that comes out and hunts at night. Trying to photograph that and get that lined up, and you know, kind of trying to balance the exposure on those shots while also framing up a composition with extremely unpredictable subjects. So I'm excited to see what tonight brings, and I've got my fingers crossed that we'll see some pretty big game tonight. The night drive was really difficult. Obviously, it's hard to see at night, and all we had was a spotlight going out to photograph something. And we had a slot of 2 hours that we were supposed to be out photographing night wildlife. And I was really excited at the possibility of seeing some big cats, you know, lions, a leopard maybe was on my list that I wanted to see. But we came up short, and at 1 hour and 50 minutes, we finally got a call of something that was going on, and we rushed over to it. And we had just enough time to capture this photograph of a lion that was walking down the road, and they just shined the spotlight on it. And I was actually using a wide angle lens to photograph this out of the side of the car, so that shows how close it actually was to us. And then his brother was actually right behind him. Difficult to see in the low light, but he was there. Wasn't able to bring him up in post-processing too much, but it was just a special moment of a night drive, and we immediately went back in, fell back asleep for another early morning the next day. Day 5 was our day to go home, and it was sad to leave, but we did have one last adventure ahead of us, and I was excited to go and see somewhere new. We had it slated to where we were going to a saltwater lake where you had water that was coming in, but there was no water going out. So not having the water circulating in this lake made it a saltwater lake, but we had a lot of flamingos that were kind of hanging around in the foreground, and then pairing it with the big Rift Valley that was behind it with some highlights on the mountains and having some highlights of greens going on in there too was fun to photograph and play with. Now, right after we had lunch after the flamingos, we went out to do a boat safari at Lake Naivasha that's kind of closer to Nairobi for our flight going back, but not quite there, still about an hour and a half away. And we got in these boats that were honestly made me think a little bit. They were smaller than the boats I would want to get in if I were going to photograph the most aggressive animal in Africa, and that's the hippo. And we went out looking for hippos, and we did find them. I found it extremely difficult to photograph because they would go underwater and then just their head, eyes, and ears would pop up above the water for just a few seconds and then go back under. So you had to constantly quickly react to where they were popping up. It was almost like playing whack-a-mole with my camera, finding these hippos and photographing them. One of the coolest things about this boat safari was the ability to photograph the eagles that were all around Lake Naivasha. And I was able to capture this just really special moment, a sequence of an eagle swooping down and grabbing a fish out of Lake Naivasha and flying off with it. A 4-photograph sequence showing the approach, the anticipation, the snag, and the flyaway catch. So I was able to come away from Lake Naivasha with some cool photographs, also some hippo photos, and some other just small detail like bird photos as well. So we had a really great 5th day. We were exhausted though, about 7 hours total travel just to get to the airport before a 15-hour flight. So we just wrapped up our trip. We did a little harbor cruise out here. If you can see behind me, just a small fishing port that jumped in some boats and headed out to photograph some hippos and some eagles, and just had some really good success there. Luckily no one got car sick too, or seasick I guess I should say. So really fun end of the trip. Sadly it's over, but can't wait till the next adventure that we go on. And I know the group got incredible shots and it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So we're signing out from Kenya.